introducing you.
Film critics say actress Ingenue Ellis has certainly paid her dues. The Oscar-nominated actress has been in the business for nearly 30 years, and she's already appeared in Academy Award-winning films like Ray, The Help, and If Beale Street Could Talk. She spoke to ICU last year from her home in the city of Macomb, Mississippi. Hey, that's exactly where I'm from.
I essentially live with ghosts because I live in the house that I grew up in, the house that my grandmother and my mother raised me in.
I'm Eddie Robinson, and stay tuned for an encore presentation featuring actress Ingenue Ellis as ICU pays tribute to her Best Supporting Actress nomination in her role as the mother of Venus and Serena Williams in the acclaimed film King Richard. In this episode, Ellis speaks about how being from Mississippi has impacted her life, both on screen and off. Oh yeah, I feel you. We hear you. I see you. This is ICU. I'm Eddie Robinson. Her name? Ingenue Ellis, an extraordinary actress who played in countless movie roles and television series, spoke to ICU from her home in Macomb, Mississippi. It's also my hometown. I wanted to learn more about why she's opted to live in the place where she grew up. For me, I used to be embarrassed to tell people that I was from Mississippi, much less Macomb, a city located in the southwest portion of the state, about 80 miles south of Jackson. With a population now of about 13,000, Macomb, back in the 60s, was actually known as a hotbed for widespread violence against African Americans throughout the 20th century. As a matter of fact, just after the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the city of Macomb was the site of about a dozen bombings directed primarily at black Mississippians, including Ellis's grandfather's church that was bombed, Society Hill, on an incident where those who were responsible were never brought to justice. Who would want to tell folks they were from a place like that? But no, not Ingenue. You can quickly tell by her spirit during our chat that she's a proud Mississippian. And I also got the sense that she's loved and honored the women in her life who've influenced her the most. That love for womanhood has now translated into her latest passion, writing about them. She's currently working on a writing project about the life of Mississippi's very own Fannie Lou Hamer, an American voting and women's rights activist who became a well-known civil rights leader who boldly advocated for the rights that so many blacks were denied during the Jim Crow South. Ellis is also examining the life of Annie Devine and Victoria Gray Adams. So Hamer, Devine, and Adams, this powerful civil rights trio, became the first black women to speak before the United States House of Representatives in 1964. So what is it about these women in particular that fascinates Ellis? And what is it about the Magnolia State that's compelled her to take up residence despite its tumultuous history? I see you. Let's find out.
Technically, I live in Macomb, Mississippi, but when I was growing up, we didn't have an address. We had a route, like Route 3. What was it? Was it Route 3?
Yeah.
34 was our address.
Mine was Route 4, Box A.
Yeah, right. Right. And then, who can find you like that?
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
I never thought of that. That's right. Right.
So I said that to say that I live really between Macomb and Magnolia, Mississippi. And I went to school in Magnolia. I live out in the woods.
Yep.
And somehow the way that the city zoned the county, I technically live in Macomb. Yes.
Yeah, yes. And I live in Fernwood, so I definitely know about the woods.
Yeah. Yes.
Do you remember much of what it was like growing up in Macomb?
Yeah, you can probably attest to this or agree with this. I think that some people live lives that have been ordered in a way that, they leave. And so home is really just a memory.
Yeah.
I came back here 10 years ago and I just started living in Mississippi full time. I would work other places, but, I moved back home essentially. So I live with it. I live how I was raised. So there are things that were a part of my culture that have disappeared. People die. Those things that made me.
Yeah.
are still here in many ways. I still live in the house that I grew up in.
Wow.
So when you have that life, that separation isn't there. So yes, how I was raised is a memory, but in fact, I'm living a memory. I think about that a lot because I essentially live with ghosts. Oof. Because I live in a house that I grew up in, the house that my grandmother and my mother raised me in, and both of them are gone now. But there are remnants of them everywhere. It's a strange existence. Yeah.
I don't know why I'm getting emotional about this now, but my father passed away in 2018. Very, very unexpected death. Whenever I go home, it's like I feel him. I feel his energy. I feel exactly his presence. And it throws me off because it's hard for me to really understand what happens when certain people die and that whole dynamic. But there's some truth to the fact that you do feel their presence and you feel that they're still there. And I hear, and I think I read that you've lost some pioneers in your life as well, correct?
So, yeah, I'm not going to go down this road too hard, you can imagine, but okay. It really is, what do you do with that? Do you drown in it or are you compelled by it? And compelled in the way that it makes you want to work, makes you want to honor them in ways that will make them proud. I looked at a picture of my grandmother the other day. I was in here cutting up about something that made me mad. I was just cursing up a storm. I looked at a picture of my grandmother and I was like, what would she think about me now? And not just because I was using profanity, which would have made her mad or whatever, but I was just thinking, what would she think about the life that I have chosen to live? It winded me. My mother was a partner in my life, but my grandmother left obviously before I had designed the life that I'm living now. So she never witnessed a lot of what I'm doing now. And so it just really sat me down and stunned me by that. Like, what would she think about me? What would she think about the life I'm living? And I think because I'm living with ghosts, it's not so much their voices, because I think what that is, one of the aspects and functions of grief is how you are left feeling because of the silence.
The silence.
Yeah, the silence. I have more of a tactile experience with my ghosts. So I can still hold my mother's clothing. I'm looking at pictures of my grandmother and touching them and that kind of thing. But living with those silences, how do you fill that space? I think what has happened with me is probably a sort of accelerated because I'm spent a lot of time away from my family because of the virus. It has made me just really want to write. And so that is what I have been doing. And I feel that these ghosts that I live with, they are ghosts that I know, but I also feel like I live with the ghosts in Mississippi that I never knew. I never knew Fannie Lou Hamer. I never knew Annie Devine and Victoria Gray Adams, and I never knew these women. But I think about them every day, all day. And I am trying to write about them and honor them. So, yeah, I don't know if that makes any sense, but...
Absolutely, it does. And I'm curious, you just named some really power hitters of Mississippi. What was it about them? And I'm sure a lot of that transpired with how you grew up and how you experienced discrimination, racism. I'm just throwing it out there based on what I've read. Is that true? And is that the product of what Mississippi is all about? And that's what's really sort of pushed you into that lane, wanting to know more about these powerful women?
Yeah, I think that my generation I was raised in the era right after the really active civil rights movement that happened.
In the late 60s.
I came right directly after that. So Mrs. Hamer was still active in the 70s, but a lot of that, the core work that they had been doing, it very quickly became history. You know what I mean? That it shouldn't have been historical, but it very quickly became history. It should have been something that we were actively talking about, actively still participating in, but that didn't happen. It was this sort of like this void that happened in the 70s. My grandfather was very active, and when he died, I think that there was a fatigue. I've said this before when I kind of had these discussions. I think that there was such fatigue, and we had the right to vote. And so all this legislation was in place. So ostensibly, we had all the things that we asked for, right? So there was this like, what, we tired of fighting. We tired. Yeah. Let's just go to church and have a good time. And so there was just none of that. All of that activism, that spirit of agitating that happened, it just was erased. And so what I dealt with was the stuff that people just weren't dealing with still, the residual of that work that was still undone. So I went to a school and we had textbooks that had been used by 5 different people. You know what I mean? We had, you know what I'm saying? Like,
I know what you mean.
The education that I had.
The residual.
Yeah, the education that I had was the residual, was the undone. But then the other side of that was, as much as I speak the truth about the villainy of the state of Mississippi, I wouldn't have wanted to live anywhere else in the world. I wouldn't have wanted to have been raised anywhere else in the world. I say this all the time. I wouldn't take nothing from my journey. And the reason why is because I am in the belly of the beast. Because I was raised in the belly of the beast. Everywhere I go, it informs me. It has been an education that I could not get anywhere else. So I have been around people, the friends that I've had, who were a lot smarter than I was. Just erudite, well-read, well-experienced, well-traveled people that I felt inferior to when I went to school in the Northeast, right? But they did not have what I had because they were protected by a lot. They were exposed to things that I wasn't exposed to. So they had a worldview that I didn't have, but I knew what they didn't know because I lived it. They talked about things. I would, go to school with these kids and they were just being activists and stuff. And I've been sitting here being like, you don't know what you're talking about. You haven't lived it.
That's right.
And I lived it. The folks I went to school with who were incredible, excellent people, and all of them, for the most part, are continuing the work that they did when they were in college. But the difference is that they could read about it, but they didn't live it. I brought a lived experience to what folks were fighting for. I'm thankful for that. I'm glad. I'm glad for that.
Coming up, more with acclaimed actress Anjanou Ellis as we dive deeper into learning more about these ghosts of Mississippi. Plus, her candid, unguarded views of what she thinks of one of the most popular dramatic series featured on PBS. Yeah, I see you. I'm your host, Eddie Robinson. Stay tuned. You do not want to miss our next segment. You're listening to an encore presentation of I See You with Eddie Robinson, featuring Oscar-nominated actress Anjanou Ellis. The conversation was recorded last year and aired in June of 2021.
Oh, Cinnamon, where you gonna run to? Cinnamon, where you gonna run to? Cinnamon, where you gonna run to on that day?
You're listening to I See You, I'm Eddie Robinson, and we've been chatting with veteran actress and NAACP Image Award nominee Anjanou Ellis. She's worked in Hollywood as an actor for more than 25 years. We continue with more from Anjanou Ellis. I do want to ask about HBO's series that you were in, and I watched every single episode of Lovecraft Country. The role that you played, in my mind, and I'm not being biased here, but that one episode that focused on you, your character, Hippolyta, and this really transformed, or at least helped me understand this entire series. And as a black man, as a gay black man, I walked away so empowered. I could shoot for anything that I wanted to do. I could aim for whatever that I wanted to become. That was how powerful it was. And I'm sure females looked at it and felt the same way. But as a black male, I felt so empowered after watching that episode.
We did not believe them when they said the hatred that we feel for our enemies is not godlike. They say that to women like us because they know what happens when we are free. Free to hate when we
When
love.
you look back at the roles that you've played, is there a character that has really transformed you as an actor? And it gives you a sense of empowerment, and it helps you to have some form of inspiration moving forward.
You know, I've been really lucky over the last, I would say, 3 or 4 years where I played roles. I've just had such fun playing them. I delighted going to work because I got to be those characters. It was great to wake up in the morning and knowing that I was going to spend time with those characters that I was playing. I was in If Beale Street Could Talk.
Be right. Lord sure works in mysterious ways.
Oh, yes, he does. Now, he may try you, but he ain't never left none of his children alone.
What you think about that lawyer Ernestine found? The boy
I had a real small role in that, and it was one of the most fun things that I've ever done. I delighted in that part, and I can't explain to you the reason why. She was someone who, you look at it on paper, she was awful, not someone you necessarily would want at the party. She's a buzzkill, but I had so much fun playing her. I just had a blast playing her, and it was fun because I could use all of this stuff that's folded in me. I could just sort of break it open and blast it out in that platform of Mrs. Hunt in If Beale Street Could Talk. And so I just really had so much fun playing that. And then 2 years ago, it came on last year, but I played Dr. Maddie Moss Clark.
He called me. This ain't about the church. This ain't about the Bible. This is about you trying to sit me down, trying to shut me up, trying to keep me in my place.
Obedience is better than sacrifice. But you didn't learn that, Dr. Clark.
And that was great fun. And I think what it is for me is that whenever I talked about the ghosts earlier, both of those women that I played, I think carry those ghosts that I live with from Mississippi.
These are my children. This is my calling. God called me to do this. Just like he called Moses, just like he called Samuel, just like he called you, Bishop.
And I don't get to break that glass open and let those women out a lot. So when I do, I feel home. And it's just a lot of fun. Yeah.
I would be remiss if I didn't say that my mother loves you as the Clark sisters' mother. That role that you played, they love you in it. They can't stop talking about that series. But apparently something was there. There was an element that you tapped into that has resounded. Plus, they love church. So there you go.
Yeah, man, we live on the shoulders of Black women who are in the church. The Civil Rights Movement, the Black Liberation Movement, the BLA, all of these things are on the shoulders of Black women in the church in places like Mississippi and places all over the South. And those voices are muted so often, they're taken for granted, they're not listened to. We wouldn't know who Martin Luther King was without the efforts of Black church women in the South. And I want to say something more since we are on PBS.
Yes.
When I talk about like what you're talking about, what is it going to take? You know, what's unfortunate is that when you have a network, this might get taken out of this, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Yeah, you have to say it.
When you have a network like PBS that is considered
public broadcasting.
Yeah, public broadcasting. But more than that, what I was saying was that's sort of considered the elite in terms of film, in terms of television.
Programming.
In terms of content and programming, this is the place that we look to for what? Masterpieces. And they literally have a series called Masterpiece.
Good evening. I'm Alistair Cook. Tonight we begin
right?
a new series.
What's unfortunate is you do not see Black faces. You do not see Asian faces, unless it's a story about colonialism. And yet, this is Masterpiece Theater. So that says to me as a Black woman, but also says to other white people who want to believe this of themselves, that only white people can produce masterpieces. How is that different? My question to you is, that to me is an Aryan worldview. How is that different from the white supremacist garbage of Donald Trump? How is that different? If you are presenting something that says, this is what is a masterpiece, and you only see white faces, what are you saying? And most of that content is British. Have the people who do the programming, have they never heard of August Wilson? Have they never heard of Toni Morrison? Have they never heard of these folks? Have they never heard of Alice Walker?
And I'm just being rhetorical here and to kind of answer your question, but they may have heard those people and those voices, but, you know, PBS may have something on Black History Month on them. There you go.
Yeah. I cannot tell you what a failure that is to Americans, that it chooses to do that. And because I like watching, I used to like more than I do when I saw it for what it was.
Sure.
But that's what I mean about these messages that are so ingrained in culture, so ingrained in language. When you are saying we are presenting masterpiece, and yet you only present white faces, that is language of white supremacy. And if anybody is listening to this or will ever hear this, that has to change.
You know, you would think that that's different when it comes to us being in the same game, in the same playing field, on the same team.
But it doesn't mean that the game has changed. Black faces can also be the arm of white supremacy. And I think that I work in an industry that was not created for me. I work in a country that was not created for me. So if the entities, we can do what we can in order to, on our end, change how we think about it. But until the studio system and until those things change, it will be the same sort of things that are happening. And we have to say that this happens because of sexism, this happens because of misogyny, this happens because of white supremacy, of racism. The systems themselves have to be changed, not just the people who are in charge, is what I'm saying. I want us to be able to do our own stuff. I want us to be able to create our own, because like I said, the systems don't change. They will continue to be the arms and legs of white supremacy. So we have to not just change the system, we have to create our own systems. That's what I'm interested in.
In order to do that, there has to be some form of equity involved, correct? In terms of pay, because that's kind of where I'm coming from.
The thing is that if we are part of a system and a culture that does not pay Black women what Black women deserve to be paid, and I see that as an extension of white supremacy, right? And it's what Audre Lorde said. You cannot use the master's tools to build something else. You have to use other tools to do that. So when we build our own, right? And this means not trying to be at anybody's table, but your own table, your own house. So when we build our own, we need to build that not with the master's tools, not with misogyny, not with racism, not with white supremacy. We build it better. And so then it will never be a question of or a parity about how Black women are paid. It won't be a question. We start from jump paying Black, because when I do my own ish, I had to say it myself, I don't want any actor complaining because I didn't pay them right. I don't want that. I don't want that. And what exists now, and I can say this because I went through this, what exists now is you have some Black folks getting paid a lot of money, but it's just a few of them. And when they are in producerial positions, they're not thinking about me and the other people who are on my level and paying us. If you're making millions and millions of dollars, why don't you want me to make one? And if you're not thinking that way, what I'm saying that I believe that is an extension of white supremacist thinking. That is an extension of misogynistic thinking, right? Where you feel that my work is not deserving of that. So what I want to do is create entities, create organizations, create culture-making entities that change that completely. That machine that creates what we see, what we hear, what we eat, whatever that is that I'm involved in.
Absolutely.
I want it to be done in a way where the people who I work with, I will always see them as partners. I will always want the women who work for me, the men who work for me, the non-binary people who work for me, to feel that they are honored by how I pay them. That is never a question of how are the people who work for me, how are they going to get paid? Or will they be paid fair? You know, I have a right to say that I deserve to be paid well. I have a right to say that.
That's right.
You know? So, yeah.
Coming up, more with actress Ingenue Ellis, her years-long campaign to remove the Confederacy emblem on the Mississippi flag. Plus, how being from Mississippi, from the city of Macomb, well, both of us even, how that's impacted and transformed both of our lives and the experiences we've encountered in the wake of the chaos of all the social unrest currently happening across our nation. Two Macomb Mississippians take it to another level. It's I See You. I'm Eddie Robinson.
Heavenly voices. Oh.
We'll be back in just a moment. And if you're enjoying this program, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast, I See You with Eddie Robinson. You can hear all the past episodes and be notified when new episodes are released. Also, please take a minute to give us a review or comment. We love getting feedback from our listeners. We're back. I'm Eddie Robinson, and you're listening to I See You. We've been chatting with acclaimed Mississippi actress Ingenue Ellis, who revealed to us earlier in this episode that she's looking to concentrate more on her writing, with a focus on Black women like Fannie Lou Hamer, a civil rights icon from Montgomery County, Mississippi, who fought to expand and secure basic rights and freedom to African Americans in the United States. Like Hamer, you can tell throughout my chat with Ingenue, a sense of boldness and audaciousness she's exemplified throughout her career as a woman of color. Her fearlessness was evident back in the year 2014. That's when Ellis was targeting the Mississippi state flag. Why? Because this flag had a Confederate emblem perched up in the upper left-hand corner of it. During that year, to spark attention and dialogue, Ingenue quietly purchased a controversial billboard near downtown Jackson. It prominently displayed the phrase, "We shall overcome," with Confederate flags serving as letters that spelled out the phrase. Afterwards, for years, Ellis continued her campaign of dismantling the state's flag through fashion statements on dresses she'd wear during red carpet engagements. Then in early June of 2020, Ingenue Ellis posted a video to the public as a Facebook message to First Lady Ellie Reeves, the Mississippi governor's wife. And it was a move I personally thought was reminiscent of the 1974 Shirley Brown song, Woman to Woman.
Hello. May I speak to Barbara? Barbara, this is Shirley. You might not know who I am, but the reason I'm calling you is because I was going through my old man's pockets this morning, and I just happened to find your name and number.
The viral video offered up powerful and sometimes potent words to convey the reasoning why the flag was to be removed. Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves had refused for years to take a stance on the matter. But with this video, Ingenue Ellis was making a clear point to say, what better way to get your point across is with a direct public message to the governor's wife.
Hello, my name is Ingenue Ellis, and this afternoon I would like to speak to Mrs. Ellie Reeves, the wife of Tate Reeves, the governor of the state of Mississippi. I am a citizen of Mississippi. I've lived there since I was 3. It is my blessed home. It is my only home. I know that there are people at home content to see Mississippi last in everything. They are content to see the state continue to fail economically. They are content to watch the brain drain with the flight of its graduates every year. They want Mississippi to remain cloistered and small. They want Mississippi to be a place that people fear and avoid. I know there are people at home who would rather die and suffer before they see Mississippi change. They, in fact, find honor in it. They are eternally in the Battle of Vicksburg. They say that Southern women are husband whisperers. Whisper to your husband and say that he could be the first governor of courage for the state of Mississippi. Turn to your husband, the man of God he claims to be, and remind him that racism is a sin, and that flag's chain on our collective souls is the wage of it. Tell him to take down that flag himself and not wait for another cowardly or malicious legislature to never take it out of committee. Tell him to take down that flag and not outsource his integrity. Tell him to take down that flag and be, as Mississippian Stan Jones says, be the first governor of the people, all the people. Mississippi is America writ small. So goes Mississippi, so goes this country. Tell him to take down that flag and change the course of history of this country for good. Thank you so much for listening.
Later that same month of June, Mississippi's Governor Tate Reeves signed a bill that stripped the Confederate battle flag symbol from it. A move that marked a surprising turnaround to a banner that had been flown over the state for over a century. And so now, moving forward with a new flag, has Mississippi changed at all? What about the nation in general, with the election of Democrat Joe Biden as the country's president? How long will the residue of racism, slavery, and oppression linger? Will efforts of diversity, equity, and inclusion really get us there? And is there a role in media and journalism? We wrap up our conversation, I See You, two Mississippians who grew up in Macomb, also known as Camellia City, our closing segment. I'm Eddie Robinson with Ingenue Ellis. This section does contain some language that may be offensive to some listeners. In terms of discrimination, what is one particular incident that's just embedded in your mind that you still remember just years, perhaps even decades later, of saying, you know, why does this experience always resonate in my mind? I know I remember one incident where I realized it was in the late 70s with my mom and dad. We went to McDonald's right outside of downtown Macomb. Mm-hmm. It's still there. Late 70s, 7 years old. I wanted some ice cream. But there was so many people in that McDonald's restaurant, I just couldn't understand why it was so busy. We stood there for at least 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. Still, no one would help. McDonald's even called the cops on my dad. And I've never seen my father act the way that he did. Of course, he was always angry, Ed, go outside and give me a switch, that kind of thing. But I had never seen smoke coming out of his head when he basically yelled at this white guy who was at a cash register and no one would help us. And I remember tagging my mom's coat and saying, "Why are we standing here for so long?" And I remember we stormed out of there, and it was certainly a bit of a mystique. They didn't want to tell me what happened. They didn't want to let me know or communicate to me what was going on, which I found fascinating. But I realized right at that moment that something's different about me. I'm Black. And as a kid, 7 years old, I didn't realize that until later. But I figured out early that I was being omitted. I just couldn't understand why, but that was the first incident that just really resonated in my mind as to I know that I'm different. Somehow, some way, I'm different and I'm being treated different. Is there some sort of memory that's embedded in your mind that sometimes you want to kind of get rid of it, but it almost pushes you, it inspires you to continue on? Is there something of that nature in your mind that resonates, that has that sort of strength?
Well, I have to be honest with you in terms of my feelings about it and how it affected me and how I was wounded by it. Those kinds of things didn't happen to me until I left Mississippi because I was so shielded and protected. I feel that there was something on the inside that sort of made it so that I could compartmentalize what wounded me and what didn't wound me.
Absolutely.
Being called a nigger by the people that I worked with at Camellia Cinema, that kind of thing. Like, I was like, that's interesting that he said that, but it didn't hurt me. And the other couple of times that I was referred to as a nigger, one happened in Providence, Rhode Island, and the other time was in Toronto, Ontario. What I know is that what I live with in terms of discrimination and what I've been affected by in terms of discrimination, I was more affected when I left Mississippi. Wow. When I started auditioning, I started going to school. When I started having a professional life in what I've chosen to do, which is acting. These are the ways, the way that I have chosen to make a living. That's my testimony to discrimination. I don't care about nobody calling me a nigger. I assume that's what you think about me. You know what I mean? I do. I assume that is what you think about me, so I don't really care. What matters to me is what ends up in my pocket. What matters to me are the jobs I get to do. And I say this because my career is acting. Yeah. If I had another kind of career, then we'd be having another kind of discussion.
Absolutely.
But those kinds of things that Black folks have to live with, which is police harassment and constant disrespect as you trying to live your life in the world, those kinds of things happen all the time. But I'm not wounded by them. I just call them out when I see them, clear and presently. I see it and I tell you about it. But it's the other part of that, the effect of how I live my life, my quality of life, right? And the quality of life of the people that I take care of. That's where it matters. That's where my energy goes to. And that's what hurts and affects me the most.
And you make a great point because I'm experiencing that currently in the sense of understanding my own value, my own worth. I think that's incredibly important from a pay equity standpoint. Sure. It really matters. It's all intentions, they're fine when it comes to work. But I think when we're talking about diversity, when we're talking about inclusion, especially equality and that piece, let's make sure that we are paid and we are paid with the value that's deserved. And that's why I really felt like I've got to talk to you. I've got to figure out what's going on with that sort of thinking because I hate the cycle. I read something about you basically saying that, the George Floyds, the Breonna Taylors, this is cyclical. What can be done to stop that? It has to cease. And I'm really upset when we see things like the 2021 uprising at the nation's capital, the 2017 Tiki Torch, Charlottesville, Virginia situation, the South Carolina church shooting in 2015. These incidents must stop, but I'm trying to understand why there's just this cycle that on some level it might even get worse and worse and worse. What will it take to stop that cycle? And I do believe there's a sense of equity that's involved there because people don't see us the same way, or at least look at us the exact same way. So why should there be pay equity involved in this when they automatically, view us as inferior? But what is going on with that cycle, and will it ever stop?
Well, I don't think it will. I think that the terrorism that you described is not going to stop until, first of all, white people call it terrorism. So that's the work that they have to do.
Tweeted that he wants to designate the terrorist organization.
We cannot do that for them. The only thing that we can do and what we should do and what we have been doing is calling it out and not letting them get away with using the language that they're choosing to use. For example, I know you know about the bombing that happened in Nashville on Christmas Day. And the dude who did it, I read one of the articles about it, and through the entire article, they were trying to make him not be a bad guy. They were saying things like he didn't really want anybody to die. If he really wanted people to die, he wouldn't have given anybody warning. They just, for the whole article, it was just trying to excuse this man for bombing the downtown Nashville. You know what I'm saying? Yes. They were saying in the piece, well, it hasn't been called terrorism because it's not associated with any sort of philosophy or any sort of movement.
Tied to that online forum used to spread hate by the
against
suspect
domestic
in Texas.
terrorism. One does not currently.
And that's what the FBI uses to qualify terrorism. And what's problematic about that is it's terrorism.
Homegrown terrorism motivated by racism, white supremacy.
And you don't call it terrorism because he's not associated with any sort of known movement. What I know is that when white people act in those ways where the idea is I can cause harm, I can build a bomb and kill people at will, that is rooted in something. That is rooted in white supremacy, whether you choose to call it that or not. And so what has happened in this country is that we don't use the language, we don't attach white supremacy to acts of terrorism by white men or white people. Even black people or people who are not white who act under the aegis of white supremacy, right? Because you can have black police officers beating the hell out of a black man. They're doing it because they're acting out of the basic philosophy of white supremacy. So here's the thing. As long as the acts of white supremacists are not given the weight of the acts of Al-Qaeda, there's no shame to it, right? That's right. We'll always find, like they tried to do with that bomber, an excuse for what they did, an empathy, a grace for who they are. Watch what I tell you. So everybody's calling what happened on January 6th an insurrection and a coup and blah, blah, blah. The whole narrative about that is going to change. One thing that's probably going to happen is that a lot of people who did what they did are going to get away with it. So we just got to be at peace with that. They are going to get away with it. And those people are in Congress. Still, right now, the idea to me that Josh Hawley has not been banned from the Capitol building.
Senator Hawley of Missouri deserves a moment of pause.
Is insane to me. Eddie, if you had gone up if you had outside the door and you had told people to run up and talk and set that crap on fire, they would have banned you from the zip code. This man is allowed to go back to work and still be an obstructionist.
I'd be dead.
Yes.
Yeah,
but
I'd be dead.
Let's take death out of it. Let's take death out of it because it's easy to kill us. let's just talk about what happens to them, right? Wow. They are allowed to live. So let's speak along those terms, okay? Wow. He is allowed to live. It's a foregone conclusion that he would be allowed to live. He would be banned as a white man. What are their consequences, right? They would be banned. You can't come in a building anymore. You would get a what do you call those things?
Is restraining order?
Restraining order, at the least.
Yeah.
At the least, this man don't even have a restraining order. He was blocking one of Biden's nominees. Right. How do you do that? Knowing what we know what he did. And he can still come to his job. They would not let you up in NPR.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Like that. Come on.
You're right. There's a weight that has been characterized that for some weird reason, it's not being acknowledged.
I do want to go back to something you said about what do we do? I stand by and I double down on this idea that it has to be a change. It has to be a sea change in language. It has to be a sea change in how people view terrorism. And I think when white supremacists particularly see that their actions are the same as people that they would call terrorists, they do the same stuff, that there's a sort of equanimity to it, then that sort of changes who they are. But it has to be how white supremacists and white people, seriously, view themselves, because they have been allowed since the inception of this country. There's been so much lore and fiction about what it means to be a white American, and they can hide behind that. But what has happened is, and what we have done, is we're pulling away at that. We've been pulling away at that for a long time, but we've been pulling away at that. And then what happens? We see what happened with the torture and murder of George Floyd. So that's another opening. So we're pulling away. And so all of these fictions are kind of falling apart. But what has to happen, it has to be a concerted effort that happens in justice. When I mean justice, I mean the entities that mete out justice, like the FBI, for example, calling things terrorism when they should be terrorism. It needs to happen in education. Who white kids see as their heroes.
The things that they were told by their fathers and grandfathers.
And the other place it needs to happen is in what we do, in film and television. It has to happen there. And so that's one of the reasons why, to bring it home, one of the reasons why I am making such an effort to tell Fannie Lou Hamer's story.
My name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, and I live at 626 East Lafayette Street, Roosevelt, Mississippi.
To tell Victoria Gray Adams' story.
I knew that it was possible. I knew that it was highly improbable, but I knew that we had to do it anyway.
To tell these stories because they are a part of the American story.
Yes.
They are a part of that stripping away, that we need to know that the Democratic Party would not be the Democratic Party that we know it is today unless Fannie Lou Hamer had done what she did in 1964 at the Democratic National Convention.
To become first-class citizens. And if the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave?
So it's that kind of effort that is going to have to be involved in all of that.
Wow. Lovecraft Country, on some sci-fi level, that really impacted you, right? I mean, on some level, from a science fiction standpoint, it was also about ghosts.
Miss Hippolyta, what are you gonna do with all that anger?
I am Hippolyta. I am Hippolyta. I am Hippolyta!
And moving forward with your interest in writing, that sounds like it played a really significant impact on your career.
In terms of like the impact that it's had on my career, I don't know. I mean, I will see about that. I mean, I just love playing the role. I love being a part of it. I was working with folks who I just think are just utter craftsmen, which was a delight. The great thing about Lovecraft Country is that I could bring my whole self to the table. I could bring my whole self on camera, my whole self in the room. And I tell people all the time, it was like one of the roles that I had been waiting for, that I had been preparing for all my life. Yep.
And, you know, that was one question that I didn't ask, but I feel like after you said that, I have to ask this. Do you feel like there's a role out there that has your name on it that you've yet to be tapped into to play?
Yeah, I do. Sure. Probably a lot of actors feel that way. But I think I'm more, at this point, like I'm more interested in writing. I want to tell these stories about these Black women from the South, you know? So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anjanou, for just being you and your authentic self. You are so amazing. And I am so wanting to make sure that I have an opportunity to at least say hello to you at some point or another, since that we're both in Macomb. Thank you so much, Anjanou.
Thank you. I appreciate you wanting to speak to me today. I really appreciate it, and I wish you every success and happiness and wellness.
And that's this episode of ICU. Thanks to our intensive care unit, technical director Todd Holzlander, producer, editor Shannon McCurchie, editor Mark DeClaudio, sound designer Dave McDermott. Check out our website for the latest updates, iseeushow.org. Follow us on Facebook, ICU Radio Show. Follow us on Twitter at ISEEU Show. I'm your host, Eddie Robinson. Thanks so much for listening.